Welcome to You Are From God, where we open the Bible and learn to see the image of God in ourselves and the people around us. I'm Scott Taylor.
And I'm Tyler Hall. Thanks for joining us today.
Welcome back to You Are From God. Last week, we started a series looking at some various verses in the Bible that sometimes people can kind of take out of context, but they're very popular verses. And so we want to really look and see what they are talking about, see if there's any misunderstandings that come up with those verses, and just make sure that we're looking at these verses in context of the book, obviously context in that chapter or in the verses that are around it, and making sure that we're applying it to our lives as God would want us to. And one of those verses that kind of comes up very quickly a lot of times is Philippians, the 4th chapter and verse 13. This is a verse, obviously, you'll see people quote fairly often. You'll see people have this up in their houses, which is fine. But sometimes this verse can be taken very quickly out of context. And that verse is, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Beautiful verse, and there's no question the power that comes with that verse. The danger, though, is when you take that verse and you apply it to almost everything that comes up. And the reality is there's some limitations for us to understand in context what he's talking about here. And that's what we want to talk about today. Philippians, the 4th chapter, obviously in this amazing book, is talking about how Paul was living through a situation while he's in prison and the struggles that obviously would come with being in prison. And he starts off the book talking about how his goal is to be with God for eternity, and if he continues to live as Christ and to die as gain, and so he has this amazing attitude. In the 2nd chapter, he talks about the greatest example for all of us on almost any subject, which is Jesus Christ, and how we can follow his example. The 3rd chapter really gets into starting this application conversation where you're starting to see, am I living for this goal? Am I doing the things I need to do for this goal? And then you get into Philippians, the 4th chapter, and you get these things that come up very quickly about anxiety. You talk about making sure we remember that Jesus or God is near us, and you talk about the peace of God that surpasses all comprehension, making sure that we are focusing on the things that are truly worthy of thought. And then practicing these things. And one of the ways that we practice these things is given to us here in Philippians, the 4th chapter, as he talks about with contentment. And I think it's important to understand the context here. In verse 10 beginning, he says, "But I rejoice in the Lord greatly that now at last you have revived your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned before, but you lacked opportunity. Not that I speak from want, for I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances I am. I know how to get along with humble means, and I also know how to live in prosperity. And in every circumstance, I have learned the secret of being filled and going hungry, both of having abundance and suffering need. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Nevertheless, you have done well to share with me in my affliction." So the context here is the fact that Paul has learned some sort of a secret that he's discussing here. And this secret is learning to be content no matter the situation that you find yourself in. So God is able to help us in any circumstance, whether it's Paul being here in prison, whether it's Paul when he was doing very well financially, or when he was doing well from a physical standpoint. The reality is that Paul had learned this secret, and the reality for us is to make sure that we make application of this part. It is important to understand God's power. There's zero question about that, and certainly that plays a big part in Philippians, the 4th chapter. But it also shows us that we have the ability, or need to have the ability, to learn how to be content. So again, when you look at the context here of this chapter, this really begins in the beginning of this chapter, talking of these ladies that needed to live in harmony, making sure that they're really focusing on God and helping one another, and making sure that they are rejoicing in the Lord, as verse 4 talks about. And again, I say rejoice, he says. Let your gentle spirit be known to all men. The Lord is near. So the first thing I think it's important for us to understand, when you talk about I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, it's the remembrance that God is near, that I am in his presence, that as a child of God, he is always going to be with me. And that's the attitude that we need to have. So when we go through various trials, when we go through struggles, what helps us tremendously is remembering that we're not going through them alone. This reminds me of so many different stories that you see throughout the scriptures, whether it's Peter walking on the water, whether it's Jesus asleep in the boat, and there's other stories as well that talk of very similar things. When we understand that God is near, that should bring some comfort to us, that should bring some contentment to our lives. And then you take the next step. In verse 6, be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. The struggle sometimes is the word anxious or worry. The interesting thing to me in Scripture is that there is an understanding for us that it's okay to be concerned about things. Matter of fact, you should be concerned about things. There are things worthy of concern. But when you have concern for things, and the difference between concern and worry is your relationship with God. Am I understanding that I'm going through these various things with God, or am I taking God out of the picture? A lot of times when we go through various trials, instead of looking at the solution or looking at the future and understanding how we can get through things with God, we get stuck looking at the problem. And so Paul, if you use him as an example, when he's caught up in prison, he could have focused on the fact that the problem is he's in prison. And he just, woe is me the whole time, and he just focuses on that, and it becomes such an issue that there's no thought of to what he can do in prison for God. Well, the reality is Paul does not do that. He looks for opportunities, and he takes advantage of those opportunities to continue to spread the gospel, to continue to reach people, to continue to be an amazing example, even while he's in prison. And so it's understanding that even while he's in prison, God was with him, and God was working. And it's the same for us as well. We need to make sure that we understand that, first of all, we can give our anxiety to God, but we can understand that we give it to him because he is with us. He's going to help us through those struggles and difficulties that we go through. If we do that and have that attitude that we're supposed to have, verse 7 tells us that we'll have the peace of God. As we've talked about many times on this program, this is not the absence of the problem. God is not suggesting that every time he's going to take the problem away. What he's saying is he's going to be with us when we go through these problems. And so you can be at peace even in the midst of chaos. What an amazing blessing that is to be able to even say. Verse 8, he talks about, look, in order for this to be something that you continually do, you need to continually nourish your mind. When you're going through various trials, it's easy to focus on them. What we need to be thinking on or dwelling on are these things that are true, honorable, right, pure, lovely, good repute. If there is any excellence in anything worthy of praise, dwell on these things. That's what our focus needs to be. And so when we're practicing, when we're building that kind of relationship with him, when we're learning that kind of trust with him, then we are able to go through the things that we go through and understand that the Lord is near and understand that we have his peace. Verse 9 is something that's important for us as well. They saw the example of Paul going through these things. They were able to see it, and he says you need to make sure that you're accepting these things that you've learned and received and heard and seen in me. You need to practice these things. We can't wait until we simply get into a situation and then all of a sudden think that we're going to be able to go through it and with the right attitude. It's a constant nourishment that we need to have as we are striving to have a closer relationship with God. Therefore, when we go through various trials, that we're able to have that confidence in him, that we're able to be content with all the things that we are going through. Now, you get closer to the verse that we've been talking about. Verse 10 talks about the fact that the people wanted to help him. I love verse 10, though, not from the simple fact that the people wanted to help him, which is awesome, but that the fact that it brought joy to Paul. Sometimes we miss these little opportunities that bring joy to us. We just don't even see them, or we take it for granted. Paul here is saying, I rejoice greatly because you are concerned for me. That's an attitude that we need to strive to have. I need to see that other people are praying for me or have concern for me, and they do, just like I have for them. And we need to make sure that we're finding contentment in that kind of attitude. And so he continues on here and talks about this learning of contentment. It's interesting from our perspective how a circumstance can change our attitude towards things. Being content, no matter what you are going through, is a learned thing. It's learned. It's something that you're actually trying and striving to have, no matter the situation. And so he says, I've learned the secret, whether I'm filled or going hungry, both of having abundance or of suffering. all those things, I can have the same attitude. It doesn't necessarily mean that you like the things that you're going through, per se, when you stop and think about it, but you do understand that I can be content with the things that I'm going through. I can understand the importance of the things that I'm going through, and that whether they're bad things, that there are things that I can learn from those situations that I may find myself in, or I can look for opportunities to help other people that may be going through very similar things that I'm going through. Or we can certainly understand that we're going to grow by going through those things. The Apostle Paul learned how to be content when he was going through horrible situations. There's no question that he went through these difficult situations. The amazing thing for us sometimes is that we are not content while we're going through good situations. And so this shows us the issue that we're really struggling with when it comes to the verse, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. We focus on the I can do all things part instead of understanding the Christ part of that sentence. And that's the danger that we fall into very quickly. This is all about my relationship with Jesus Christ. If I have a relationship with him, he is going to strengthen me no matter what I am going through, that I am able to get through those struggles and able to get through the good times because of my relationship with him. And it doesn't change my perspective of the things I go through because of the circumstances that I find myself in. Let's understand what I'm trying to say here. When we talk about this particular subject, there are people that feel closer to God when they are going through good circumstances, or what they view to be good circumstances. Or they just begin to take things for granted and starting to push off God in those good times. When things get bad, people seem to get closer to God, or they blame him. And so we, as God's children, need to take a step back and say, okay, am I just going through various circumstances and focusing on the circumstances that I'm going through, or what is happening to me, or am I focusing on my relationship with Jesus Christ? Do I have a relationship with the creator of all things that is so powerful, so strong, that it's able to get me through any circumstance that comes my way? And I'm not going to change the fact that I'm going to choose joy because I know he is going to be near. It doesn't mean that Paul or any of us are happy when you go through various trials or the struggles that come with those, but you can be joyful. You can understand that there is purpose to them. You can understand and see that there's growth that's going to come. And more importantly, we can understand that God is near. And that's the attitude that we need to have. So I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me because I have a relationship with him and understand who he is. Therefore, when I'm hungry, or if I have abundance, or if I'm suffering, whatever the case may be, I'm able to go through those things because of him. He goes on here in context and talks about, again, this gift, going back to the opportunities because of what Paul was going through, the opportunities that were available to those around him. So the circumstances that Paul found himself in also gave opportunity for other people to do amazing things. What a tremendous example Paul is on various fronts. And he was just a human, just man. But his relationship with God was such that it is able to see the opportunities that in his difficult situations were given to other people because of the struggles that he was going through. And he found joy in that kind of attitude. And that's the attitude that you and I need to have when we go through and encounter various trials, because we will. What comes down to, though, is whether or not we trust our God enough to help us through those times and to make sure that our relationship continues to grow during those times. I encourage you, as we encourage each other, that we continue to grow in this aspect of life, that we continue to practice and nourish the relationship that we have with God, to never forget that he is near, to never forget that we can always lean on him and he's always going to help us through the things that we go through. It may not be the taking away of the problems that we go through, but he will go through them with us. And we need to understand that he absolutely cares so much for you. You are a daughter or the son of the King. And it's a tremendous opportunity for us to see that wonderful relationship that we have with him, no matter the circumstances that we find ourselves in. He was willing to send his son to go through horrible, horrible things to give you and to give me an opportunity to have a relationship with him. And we can never forget how blessed we are to be able to have that kind of relationship with him, not just to be saved, which is awesome, but to be a part of his family, because never, never forget you are from God.
Thanks for listening. Show your support by leaving a review on your podcast app, and share this episode with someone you want to encourage. If you have questions or would like to get in touch with us, go to youarefromgod.com. That's youarefromgod.com.